Do you struggle with bloating, digestive distress, weight gain, lower belly fat that will not seem to go away no matter what you do, anxiety, fatigue, sleep issues, just overall overwhelm? If so, you may be struggling with high cortisol. A current trend on social media is the discussion of stress and cortisol. But wait, what even is stress and what is cortisol? Let's start off with stress. Stress comes in many different forms. It's not just emotional or mental. So yes, stress comes from more than just disliking your job, an argument with a loved one, or because your partner loaded the dishwasher improperly. Bodily stress can stem from many different things, such as gut health issues and gut disease, inflammation and having higher levels of omega-6 fatty acids compared to omega-3s, as well as immune-based stressors such as a virus, bacterial overgrowth, and any sort of acute or chronic immune issue, including a pathogenic disease, as well as heavy metal toxicity, mold toxicity, any sort of toxicity or burden to the body, working out too much, restrictive eating, drinking caffeine on an empty stomach, working out every single day, really intensely. All of these things and more can create inflammation and stress on the body. So, long story short, what is stress? Stress is a physiological response that shifts the nervous system into the sympathetic mode, which is our survival mode, the fight or flight, that like running from the tiger analogy that many people use when explaining the stress response. We are shifted into this mode of the nervous system. In the short term, our stress response is not a bad thing, especially when we really are fighting and or running for our lives. However, in the long term, like most things, we do not want to be experiencing stress chronically. And if you care about your health and longevity, and for my ladies listening, if you care about your hormone health, ovulation, or entire ovulatory menstrual cycles, fertility, your hair, your skin, your nails, if you care about all of these things, then it is really important to address our stress. So, what is cortisol and how does it relate to stress? Cortisol is a glucocorticoid, which is a steroid hormone that is produced by the adrenals when the body is under stress. There are various glucocorticoids that are produced when we are under stress, such as adrenaline, noradrenaline, also referred to as epinephrine and norepinephrine, aldosterone, cortisol, and more. Cortisol is what is most frequently talked about because cortisol is the hormone that gives the human body the fuel for stress. So this leads us to the question, is cortisol good or is it bad? Well, cortisol in itself, in the acute term, just like stress, is actually a healthy thing, and cortisol in the short term is anti-inflammatory. However, in the long term, cortisol is actually pro-inflammatory. Cortisol also causes the body to become more catabolic and to break down our muscle tissue, bone, and to worsen assimilation. So cortisol can be both good and bad depending on if we are talking about short-term or long-term. Again, like most things in this life, anything to the extreme is just inherently not good for us. So we have defined stress, we have also defined cortisol, what it is, and under what circumstances is it produced. But why should you care? Well, many women and men alike struggle with high cortisol, and symptoms of high cortisol can look like the following: bloating, gut and digestive issues, immune issues including autoimmune, inflammation, swelling and puffiness, especially puffiness of the face is a very common sign of higher cortisol, high blood sugar and insulin sensitivity issues, menstrual irregularities, estrogen dominance, lowered DHEA, especially when we get into that third stage of stress known as adrenal dysfunction, as well as lowered progesterone. And on this note, many of us have heard of this phenomenon known as the pregnenolone steal. However, this term is pretty outdated because it's not necessarily that the cells are stealing pregnenolone from this big bucket of pregnenolone from one another in order to make cortisol. cortisol, as we know that we need pregnenolone in order to make cortisol, as well as our other steroid hormones such as DHEA, which then breaks off and creates testosterone and estrogen. And we know that pregnenolone also is the precursor and creates our progesterone. So we have moved away from that notion of there being this big pool of pregnenolone that the cells are stealing, air quote, from, and instead a more proper term for this is called selective glucocorticoid synthesis. This essentially is just meaning and explaining that when the body is under stress, the adrenal cortex and ovarian cells are going to prioritize producing and synthesizing cortisol over progesterone, DHEA, and therefore testosterone and estrogen. So the impacts of this, right? Because we can say all of these, scientific terms and all of these processes, which by the way, this is such a brief overview. All of these are also catalyzed by complex and intricate enzymatic processes and pathways, but beyond all of that and breaking through all the noise, what this means and what this can result in is, again, the estrogen dominance. Even if estrogen is a little bit lower, you can still have estrogen dominant symptoms because your progesterone is lower as well. And it can worsen PMS. It can cause that breast tenderness, that swelling, that puffiness, that weight gain as well. It can start to create thyroid and metabolism issues, especially when prolonged and experienced for long periods of time. It can cause breakouts. Our hormones are a part of nearly every single physiological process of the body. So when our hormones start to become higher or lower than they should be, then, the body and mind will start to reap those consequences. And it really all makes sense when you think about it, that when the body is under stress, the body is going to prioritize, the body and the mind are going to prioritize survival over digestion, over immune function, over reproductive function, and metabolism. So it makes sense. Our body is really smart and it's doing these things for a reason. When our adrenaline, noradrenaline, aldosterone, cortisol, when all of these stress hormones are being produced, it again shifts us into the sympathetic nervous system, which we mentioned earlier, which is our survival mode, our fight, our flight mode. The other side of this is the parasympathetic system. So the parasympathetic is coined as the rest and the digest. This is where a lot of the healing goes on. This is a much more anabolic system, right? So rebuilding, repairing. So again, neither is the best or the worst. We want to be able to have healthy systems across the body and mind as a whole, and especially our nervous system. We should be able to get into the fight or flight when warranted, but also be able to recover and come back into the rest, digest, and the heal state known as the parasympathetic mode. Because when we're in the sympathetic mode, again, digestion, immunity, and metabolism, thyroid, reproductive function, all of these are they're not going to turn off, right? But they are going to downregulate. It's picture like little dials, right? We're going to turn it back a little bit until the body feels safe enough and is no longer having to produce all of these glucocorticoids. It feels safe enough to, turn the dial down on the glucocorticoids, turn the dial down, including on the cortisol, regulate blood sugar, and just come back into more homeostasis. This is the final part of the episode. We are going to talk about how we actually support our body in reducing cortisol and the other stress hormones and moving more into the parasympathetic mode from the sympathetic mode. Also, a really cool side note, we have research to show that the more we are in our parasympathetic mode and just a deep, restful, even meditative state, the more we produce our DHEA, which is really awesome. Okay, so here are some actionable tips. We first must talk about nutrition because our nutrition can really either make or break our health. So I have a ton of podcast episodes and YouTube videos on nutrition, so I won't get too deep into it, but essentially just nourish yourself. A lot of us, especially women, are under eating, and on top of that, we are overworking out, we're overly stressed and running around all the time and committing ourselves to so many things. So make sure to actually nourish yourself. Please choose a diet, a way of, I don't like that word. So please choose a way of eating that works best for you, that feels best for you as well. Making sure to choose organic, local as well, if possible, especially when it comes to eggs and meat and poultry. Choosing local, choosing organic, pasture raised, grass-fed, grass-finished. Essentially just choose real and wholesome and nutrient dense foods and actually nourish yourself. Don't restrict. Please, please, please nourish yourself. Next would be sleep. Sleep is so important. So many people are not sleeping enough, or maybe they think that they're sleeping enough, but whenever they start to use some sort of sleep tracker, such as the Oura Ring, they realize that they may be in bed for 8 to 9 hours, but they're not actually sleeping that long, and they're not getting full quality REM or deep sleep. So really prioritize sleep, making sure that you have a nice bedtime routine, which again, I have podcast episodes for this of how to wind down the hour or two before bed. And I also give options if you only have like 30 minutes to wind down before bed. So I give all of the tips and tricks in my sleep-focused podcast episodes, as well as herbal remedies. But please prioritize your sleep. It's going to be huge when it comes to regulating your nervous system and to support just your overall stress resiliency and your stress response. Next are herbal remedies. So there are many different herbs that you can use, that you can drink in tea or tincture form or take in a capsule form to support your nervous system, to boost your stress resiliency, to reduce inflammation, etc. My absolute favorite, I feel bad saying that to the other herbs, but this is truly like probably my most favorite herb to reduce cortisol and to support the nervous system and to be this really powerful anti-inflammatory adaptogenic herb. It's ashwagandha, and I have an entire podcast episode and YouTube video on ashwagandha, so I'll link it up in the show notes of this episode. Please go watch and or listen to that. It's a very powerful episode. I address any questions that people have about ashwagandha and common questions and common misconceptions I address in the episode, as well as all of the many, many benefits of ashwagandha. So there's, of course, chamomile and lavender and valerian and lemon balm. There are many, many other herbs that you can use to reduce stress and to support your nervous system, but ashwagandha is definitely one of my favorites. So this next one kind of couples in a little bit with nutrition, but also when it comes to balancing your blood sugar and supporting healthy insulin sensitivity, it does go beyond just nutrition. So I think it deserves its own little spot. So when it comes to regulating blood sugar, again, many tips on this. I have resources for you all, but easy ways to regulate your blood sugar and therefore also support your stress response is number one. It's like, well, first of all, it's kind of like this vicious cycle, because the more stressed you are, the more you'll spike blood sugar. And then the more you spike blood sugar, let's say from a meal that's just naked carbs, which is just carbohydrates and low or no protein or fats at all. Whether you spike your blood sugar from that or from a crazy hard workout that was fasted and you had a cup of coffee or caffeine beforehand, that then causes more stress and inflammation. So it's like this vicious cycle. It's like, either one can kickstart the other. But when it comes to blood sugar balance outside of meals, right, because we know that in order to create a blood sugar balancing meal, we need a complete protein, 20 to 30 grams per meal, hormone healthy, nutrient dense fat, such as olive oil, tallow, avocado, nuts, seeds, etc. fats, and complex carbohydrates. So again, the exact complex carbohydrates that you choose and the amount of them are going to be very unique to each individual. So making sure that you again choose foods that work best for your body and making sure that they are very fiber rich as well. That's going to support your blood sugar. But again, outside of nutrition, taking walks after meals helps to regulate your blood sugar postprandial, meaning after meals. Also, taking a shot of apple cider vinegar, a little bit of spring water, and herbal bitters before meals not only supports with digestion and nutrient absorption, but it also supports to regulate your blood sugar, again, postprandial after a meal. Another thing that usually people don't like to hear that can help to regulate your blood sugar as well as reduce stress is to just close your eyes, take a few deep breaths. You don't have to meditate for 10, 20, 30 plus minutes. Just to take even 6 deep breaths before a meal will also support in reducing stress and will therefore support your blood sugar levels as well. And if you can, get outside, soak in some sun, and dare I even say stick your bare feet in the grass. Both of these activities will also support blood sugar regulation after meals. And deep quality sleep also supports blood sugar regulation. And one of my favorite herbs for blood sugar regulation is Ceylon cinnamon. And I know I just mentioned sun and nature, but I want to also talk about it in terms of reducing stress and cortisol, because we just talked about it as it relates to blood sugar. Getting outside in nature, getting that sun in your eyes, please don't look straight at the sun, but letting your eyes receive that sunlight and that information to regulate your circadian rhythm, to support sleep the following night, to regulate your nervous system, and to regulate your blood sugar, all of these lovely, powerful things that sun and nature do for the human brain and body. It's just insane to me that most people don't get outside any more than 10 or so minutes every single day. So here's my gentle and loving reminder to please get outside more, even if it's not sunny, still soaking in that natural light. It'll still be incredibly beneficial for you. Even just listening to the sound of birds is so calming for the nervous system and reduces cortisol levels. So get outside more, soak in the sun, the fresh air, and the nature and all of the nature sounds. Well, that is all for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we talked about a lot today, but there is seriously so much more that I could talk about when it comes to the nerdy, more sciencey pathophysiology of stress and the 3 stages of stress and how reproductive function and our hormones, all of that is really down-regulated when we are in a state of stress. But in this episode, I really just wanted to emphasize the detrimental effects that prolonged stress and higher levels of cortisol can do to the body and to the mind, to our immunity, our digestion. Even in the short term, just being stressed, it's going to turn off our digestion and our immunity. And even though that may be in the acute moment, you think about, okay, we eat 3 meals a day. If we're stressed all day long, we're not actually digesting that food. And chances are we're probably bloated all day long and not actually assimilating the nutrients from the food that we're eating. So I just wanted today's episode to be about the importance of reducing stress and the importance of reducing cortisol and some actionable tips to do so. And if you feel like I already have nutrition and all these other factors kind of nailed down, but there are some things that Maddie mentioned that I want to dive deeper into, please again subscribe to my channel, look through all of my previous YouTube videos and my podcast episodes over on Spotify and on Apple, because I have so many resources for you. And again, if you want to get more nerdy into the pathophysiology of stress, I will link up the article that I have written for this episode that is on the Peace Love Hormones website. So thank you again for tuning in. If you have any other suggestions for future topics, drop them in the comments below and I will add them to my list. Have a beautiful day or evening. And until next time, peace, love, hormones.